Hello my test tubes and welcome to a step preparation video. Today I'm going to be covering a very important topic in step exam technique, that being able to choose the right questions. Of course, over the course of your preparation for step, you should aim to at some point be able to do all of the questions, the topics of which your school has covered. So if your school never covered further stats, then you shouldn't be able to do stats step 3. But if your school has covered further mechanics, then you should be able to do step 3 mechanics, even if you don't like mechanics. However, you will realise that you're better at some questions than others, and the key step is to choose the right questions when you're writing the real exam. And at least from my experience, if you try to choose the right questions the first time you're writing a timed paper, you'll often find that you chose the wrong questions thinking they were right. So my advice would be to practice on non-timed paper. Look at a step past paper, select good questions, select bad questions, and then work through the paper in non-timed conditions. And then as you begin to ramp up to timed papers, you should do pretty much the same thing but quicker in timed conditions. So the exercise that I'm going to go over and introduce is you partition the set of questions that you get into about 4 bad questions, about 4 good questions, and about 4 meh questions. I'm going to be doing this in my question preference, just to show you my thinking behind how I choose whether question's bad or good. So you shouldn't listen to my advice on whether you should choose a particular type of question or not. You should listen to my advice on what your thinking should be when you choose a particular type of question, because my bad questions could end up being your good questions. Yeah, let's get on. When you choose the questions, you should aim to sort of end the choosing over a 3 to 5 minute period, maybe 2 to 5 minute period. So don't look over the questions very, very carefully, but do try to sort of skim over everything in the question. I'm going to be going over 2019 step 1, and because I already read the questions beforehand, I haven't read them in a lot of detail, but I did read them. I suggest anybody who's viewing this and who wants to use this as an example for themselves in the future does go over the 2019 Step 1 questions. Just read through them quite quickly and come back. So, for the purposes of the demonstration, I'm going to be using photos of me to rank how much I like a question. The leftmost one is like, yay, this is a good question. And the rightmost one, as you may have guessed, is not a good question, and the middle one is like meh. Anyway, question 1. Also a reminder, question 1 is definitely not always the easiest question of the paper. What people tell you. However, it's also never the hardest. So I'm already having good vibes from the question because I know it's not the hardest question of the paper. Yay! I look over and I realise that it's a bunch of sort of coordinate-y, graphy algebra stuff, which I'm happy with. Then look over the last 2 sections. So this tangent meets the y-axis at R, and the area of triangle OPR is denoted by T, show that S is larger than a third T. I, by reading through the question, can sort of figure out how I would go over showing that S is larger than a third T just via inequalities. So I'm happy with this question, and I think because if this question appeared later on in the paper, I might be less happy, but because it's the first question, I know it's going to be not too difficult, and so I'm going to rate it as a yes. Don't do that if you find the first question of the paper and you don't know what to do about it. Just don't do that. It's not necessarily a good question, but if you do know what to do in the first question, definitely do it, because it's not going to be too difficult. Second question. Now this question looks very easy, but because, as you can see, it only relies on logs, that also means that it's going to rely on a lot of logs, and your knowledge about logs has to be significant. I mean, no, not your knowledge, but your comfortableness. How you're comfortable with logs has to be significantly more than what is demanded at A-level. I think a good STEP in general has an average difficulty of questions that doesn't really change from question to question. However, I guess that they can be sort of separated into two different types. Question with a new concept, where the concept itself is difficult, and then ideas behind what to do in the rest of the questions are quite easy. You just have to work with the new concept. And then questions with a very old concept that's very, very well rooted in your brain, such as integration, and then the ideas behind what you do next are more difficult. And I find the latter type of question more difficult than the former. I really, really like questions where they introduce new stuff that might change from person to person. However, I also feel quite confident with logs. I like logs quite a bit, so I'm going to go with a yes for this one, even though usually if this was integration, for example, I would not. Next, question 3. The first two paragraph things look really nice to me. I know exactly what to do. And then the third one, it says, find the relationships between alpha and beta. The relationships, I don't like enumerating things. So even though the first two parts were really nice, because finding the relationships means that there's probably going to be quite a few, and I'm going to have to look at how A depends on B, probably. I'm guessing, I haven't done the question yet, how A depends on B just to be able to classify them. I think that that's A, time consuming, B, I could also be very wrong in what I write down because I'm not that great at that. But it doesn't seem like a very, very difficult question. It just seems like a question where I could go wrong. So I'm going to give it a meh. Next, question 4. I said I didn't like integration questions. However, if you look at the question as a whole, it's not really an integration question. It is a question that introduces some new stuff, and then that new stuff happens to have integrals in it. So it looks feasible, but it's not the first question I'd go for just because it has integrals in it. It also doesn't seem very, very comforting to me, at least. Just the vibe of the question. Sometimes you go by the vibe of the question, yeah. So I'm going to give that a meh as well. For question 5, the question introduces a new, not new notation, but a new concept-ish. The third part is quite worrying. I see A show that there is no integer e such that S of e is equal to 2019. I've previously had bad experiences with these types of questions, but these bad experiences came from bad experiences in Olympiads. Also, I kind of see how I can get to part 3 from the first two parts, just through generalizing, I think, part 1. And therefore that gives me a little bit of confidence. Also, I like the fact that this seems like new stuff to everybody, so I'm going to give that one a yes, just because it's one of the things that I'm confident in. Next, I see a rather long question, and I know there's going to be quite a few long questions in the future as well, but this one has, no, it doesn't introduce new notation. That's kind of new notation I don't like because it's not a new concept, and it's I just don't feel comfortable with long questions that involve sequence type stuff. Personal preference again, but do work with this type of information that you have for yourself. So that's a no. Next, 7 seems completely doable, but I'm thinking the transformation that I'm applying in part 1, it's given to me, and I'm probably going to have to apply it the same or a different transformation for part 2, 3, and 4. And that can be quite a lot of algebra, where I can go wrong, maybe, quite easily. So just to stay on the safe side, it's not one of the first questions I'd choose, because I think there is quite a big possibility for me for me to go wrong. No question 7 for me. Also, it's not that bad. So. And now you may realise, so that's a Met, by the way. I think they're very similar to the smiley one. That was a mistake. But you may have realised now that a lot of the questions in Pure that I've shown you are very, very positive. They're either meh or smiley. That's because I'm better at Pure than the other ones. Also okay at stats. Very bad at mechanics. This will differ from person to person. You can still choose a bad Pure if you're good at Pure, and you can still choose a good mechanics if you're bad at mechanics. I am still going to write the mechanics papers of the mechanics questions, even if I am bad at mechanics, just because in case there is a very, very easy mechanics question and all of the Pure questions seem a bit difficult. And I think you should keep this open mind until at least 2 months before the exam. When you get to 2 months before the exam, just forget everything. Forget all the subjects that you don't like. While you're preparing for STEP, you should keep your mind open, because you could become better at it. Maybe you could also accidentally just get a very good question that happens to be in a topic that you don't like. Now, this one I really like because it introduces new notation. Nothing to say here. It does have integrals, but then again, I think it's just integrals that happen to be in a question that's about new notation, not the other way around. So yes, good question. Question 9, mechanics. Also, I see that there is traffic lights, which probably involves time. I also see in the formula there's a giant time letter thing, and I don't like that idea, especially with the inclined planes. So I'm thinking I could go about. I was thinking before I saw the time I could go about the proof using energy, but then I see the time and I'm very concerned because straight away I don't have any ideas about all this. If I thought about it, I might, but this is not a question that I would like to attempt under exam conditions. Not at all. Next, question 10, trains. And I know how to calculate the tension between two carriages really, really well in a train because I've been practicing that. So part I is good for me. Part 2 is also good because it's also calculating tension in between two carriages, and part 3 is also calculating the tension between two carriages. It's going to be a lot of algebra, but out of mechanics questions, like this is my dream mechanics question. I'm going to give a yes on that one. Next, 11. 11 seems very long. 11 seems doable because it's it's just planes and pulleys. I'd usually be quite good at planes and pulleys, relative to my mechanics level. But it's also a long question, and I think that part 3 is going to have quite a bit of marks just because it's funky over there. And I'm not sure how well I'd be able to lead up to part 3. So I would get to part 3 eventually, but because I'm trying, because I know that in exam conditions, I want to limit my time per question to a certain amount of time. I think by the time I reach the middle of part 3, I'll have to go do something else, and that's throwing away quite a bit of marks for nothing. So a definite no on that one. Next, 12. 12 seems very good. It's just probability. Part 1 I know how to do. Part 2 is just variance and expected values. Part 3 is variance and expected values, and part 4 is variance and expected values. And I know how to do part 3 and part 2 using tree diagrams. Part 4, like you should think of what you're going to do straight away while just looking at questions, and then part 4 is just inequalities. So that's a good one. And then question 13. Question 13, each of the sections seem feasible, but I think that I could make a mistake early on in one of the sections. They're not related to each other, but I could make a mistake early on in one of the sections, and that would discredit a whole section. costing me a few marks. And I also think that, again, as with the mechanics questions with 3 parts, I might take quite a bit of time on each part, depending on how I feel or how difficult the question actually is. I haven't attempted it currently, so I don't really know. But I'd rather not risk it. At the same time, it's not that bad. So meh. Great. So after you finish that, you should work through the whole paper in non-exam conditions. Just work through the questions, each separately, and try to note down which questions you thought you were easy and which you thought were difficult. Then compare your predictions of the questions difficulty to how difficult you actually thought they were, and look at the differences, look at the similarities, look at why you predicted something wrong and why you predicted something right, and learn from that, so that you know which questions are actually better for the next paper. And if you do this for a few papers, say 10, then you will notice that your question choice will be getting much better, which is great. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope that all of your exams go perfectly well. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope you have thank you for listening, and I hope that your exams go perfectly well. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope that your exams go perfectly well.